They say after a storm the sky forgets how to rain for a while. Daniel thought his storm had passed. He had buried his first love, raised 2 children through silence and sleepless nights, and finally found someone who made the house sound alive again. Her name was Melissa. She came with perfume that promised calm and a smile that said, "You can rest now." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to stop fighting shadows and start living in light. Noah was 15, protective, stubborn, and far older than the jokes he told. Emma was 12, sharp, quiet, the kind of girl who noticed when people changed their passwords but forgot to change their tone. Together, they were Daniel's compass, the only reason he still believed in mornings. When Melissa moved in, the house began to change in small ways first. There were candles on tables, soft music in the kitchen, and phrases like "we're a team now" floating in the air like perfume. Daniel smiled at her warmth. The children smiled back, but only because they were polite. Emma didn't trust warmth that arrived with an agenda. Noah didn't trust anyone who smiled too easily. On the first morning of this story, pancakes were burning while laughter filled the kitchen. Daniel flipped one onto Emma's plate, proud of the heart shape he'd managed. "It's perfect," he said. Emma tilted her head. "It's a potato, Dad." He laughed anyway. For a moment it felt like a family again. Melissa entered dressed like a new chapter, flawless, focused, full of plans. She kissed Daniel on the cheek and said, "Wish me brilliance." She had a presentation that day for her boutique proposal, a dream of selling handcrafted candles and ethical beauty that would, in her words, make us proud. Daniel believed her because believing people was what he did best. The kids watched quietly. Noah pushed his plate away. Emma watched Melissa more than she watched her food. She noticed how the woman's hand shook slightly when Daniel asked about the joint account card. "I'll bring it right back," Melissa said, too quickly, too smoothly. Later that evening, Melissa returned home glowing with victory. "The landlord loved me," she said. "I got the lease offer." She danced around the living room, waving imaginary keys. Daniel's eyes lit up like he'd found a reason to breathe again. He her, hugged her, said the words he always said, "I'm proud of you." But Emma's smile didn't reach her eyes. "That was fast," she murmured. Melissa looked down at her, then smiled too wide. Sometimes the world opens doors for people who are ready. That night over Thai food, the conversation shifted to money. Melissa explained that she needed to use the joint account temporarily for her business. "Just to hold the deposit," she said. "Nothing big. 2 months' rent, a few supplies." Daniel nodded. He didn't even ask how much. He never asked when someone said, "family." Noah noticed. So did Emma. They noticed everything. After dinner, Melissa retreated to her small office, the one Daniel had set up for her with a desk, a ring light, and a printed quote that read, "Manifest what you deserve." The door closed. Voices rose softly behind it. A whisper. A laugh. Then silence. Emma didn't like silence when it followed whispers. The next day, she told Noah she had a feeling something wasn't right. He shrugged, told her to stop watching too many detective shows. But Emma didn't watch, she observed. "The text alerts on Dad's phone stopped last week," she said quietly. "The ones from the bank. How do you even notice that?" Noah asked. "Because they used to light up the counter every morning. And now they don't." Noah didn't know how to respond. Emma's instincts had been right before. About the neighbor's fake charity, about the teacher's missing wallet, about their dad's smile the year after Mom died. When Emma said something felt wrong, it usually was. That night, Daniel announced that Melissa had officially signed the lease. "We're starting a family business," he said, his eyes hopeful again. Noah forced a cheer, Emma forced a smile, and Melissa raised a glass of cheap champagne. "To new beginnings," she said. The next morning, Noah noticed Melissa asking for his phone passcode. "Just to set screen time limits," she said, laughing when he hesitated. "Your dad asked me to help with discipline." He gave it to her reluctantly, something in her tone scratching against his nerves. Emma saw it too. "Don't let anyone install things on your phone," she warned later. He asked why. "Because control doesn't always wear a leash," she said. By evening, their father's face looked tired but peaceful. He told them Melissa was just ambitious, trying to build something for the family. Emma wanted to believe him, but her brain wouldn't let her heart off the hook. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling that still carried the shadows of her mother's laughter. She pulled out her diary, her. But the landlord has no name. And love shouldn't come with passwords. 2 days later, while Daniel made tea, Emma saw Melissa's phone screen flash on the kitchen counter. A message. Uptown Collective confirms transfer received. She memorized the words before the screen went dark. Later that evening, she told Noah. It's the same name from Dad's account, she said. The transfer records say funds moved from the education savings. Noah frowned. That's the college fund. I know. How much? 3 transfers. $900 each. That's $2,700. That's not rent, he said. It's something worse, she replied. Noah didn't sleep that night. He paced the hallway, anger burning behind his teeth. Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the glow of her tablet. She was building a pattern: dates, amounts, vendor names. If she's moving money piece by piece, Emma whispered, it won't trigger an alert. It's like bleeding slowly. Noah leaned against her doorframe. Dad's gonna break if we're right. Then we break first, she said quietly, and hold him up later. In the morning, Melissa was already dressed for errands. She kissed Daniel on the cheek, told him she'd be home by dinner. Don't wait up, she added, smiling that same perfect smile that used to look like warmth. Emma watched from the stairs. There was something final in that goodbye, like someone locking a door behind her before leaving. When the car pulled away, Emma turned to her brother. It's happening today. Noah nodded. Then we act today. They opened their father's old laptop, the one synced to family emails and school forms. Emma dug through folders until she found the shadow copy of the joint account. The bank alerts were there, lined like breadcrumbs. Security update. Transfer executed. Vendor setup successful. It wasn't the proof they needed, but it was the pattern they feared. Tomorrow she'll take the rest, Emma said softly, and after that she'll be gone. Noah clenched his fists. Then tomorrow we stop her. Emma closed the laptop and exhaled. No. We turn the tables. For the first time in weeks she smiled, not with fear, but with a strange, quiet certainty. Her mother used to say, justice doesn't always come from grown-ups. Sometimes it's born from the kids who refused to be fooled. The siblings made their silent vow. They would not lose their future. They would not let their father's kindness become the reason they went hungry. They would fight with truth, not vengeance. And in the end, they would make the woman who stole from them wish she'd never underestimated the 2 children she called, you too. In families like ours, plans don't begin with speeches. They begin with chores that take a little too long and questions that sound like kindness. The morning after the rain, the house woke to a promise of sun, and the children woke to a promise of courage. Noah moved through the kitchen like a storm, pretending to be a boy, opening and closing drawers, pretending to look for a whisk he already held. Emma sat with her diary and a pencil that had learned to listen. Their father hummed a tune from the years when grief had a different name. The kettle clicked. Toast popped. Somewhere inside the walls, the future shifted its weight. Emma had mapped the pattern in ink. She drew 3 small boxes on the page and labeled them with dates and vanished dollars, then left a 4th box empty the way a chair waits for a late guest. She didn't believe in miracles, but she believed in behavior, and behavior loved a routine. Thieves did too. The 4th transfer would come. It would try to pass itself off as ordinary. She would be there to accept its confession. Their stepmother moved like victory. She kissed Daniel on the cheek as if she were blessing a loyal soldier and said she would swing by the space, meet the landlord, handle the boring paperwork. When she smiled at the children, the smile arrived first and the warmth arrived later, and by the time it reached the skin, the moment had already cooled. Noah said good luck, with a voice that sounded like a locked door. Emma said nothing at all. Silence can be a mirror. Sometimes it shows you more than faces do. When the car pulled away, Daniel asked if anyone needed a ride after school. He held his mug with both hands like it was winter. Emma told him she would be late at the library, which was true if you counted the internet as a library and necessity as a librarian. Noah said he had lab cleanup, which was true if justice counted as an experiment and evidence as glassware. Their father nodded and told them he'd make spaghetti. He said it the way men say it when they need a plan that will not betray them. At school, Noah could not hear the teacher over the sound of his own pulse. He kept seeing a metal door with the word college painted on it in his head. And he kept seeing a hand he did not trust prying at the hinges. He himself that anger was a fuel, not a fire. Emma did not need to remind him. She reached for his sleeve under the desk and pressed her fingers twice, a code they had invented when the world started getting loud. 2 presses meant, here. He steadied. After the final bell, they did not go home. They went to a small table near the library window where the light slid across their notebooks like a quiet promise. Emma opened the family laptop and pulled the bank's ghost copies from the shadowed folder. The 4th transfer had arrived as predicted. A polite note addressing no one, apologizing for nothing. She traced the numbers with her eyes. Still 900, still from the account their mother used to nickname Tomorrow's. Still toward a checking account now serving strangers. She typed the vendor name again, Uptown Collective. This time the screen coughed up a website with photographs that looked like stock images, too afraid to admit it. There was an address, a phone number, and a thin biography about community and curation that managed to sound like both and neither. Noah leaned over her shoulder. Call them, he said. Emma did not like telephones. Telephones bit. She called anyway. A bright voice answered as if everyone who called had already agreed to be fooled. Emma said she was helping her mom confirm a vendor payment for a boutique launch. The voice chirped. Yes, invoices went out on Mondays. Yes, retainer packages posted as vendor setup. Yes, she could email a confirmation. What email should she use? Emma gave their father's ancient family address, the one he thought he'd retired the way old soldiers retire uniforms. Emma thanked the voice and hung up. She stared at the phone as if it could tell her what the chirping meant about the person holding it. Noah whistled low. They sell the idea of a business, he said. And they collect from anyone who wants to buy the idea. On the bus home, the siblings did not sit together. They let the world think they were far apart. The world misunderstands a lot of things. Emma watched the city move by in panes of glass. She wondered how many storefronts were empty dreams with locks. She wondered how many locks were kept bright by the hands of people who kept trying the same door anyway. When they climbed off, the air felt like a held breath. The house waited. Daniel was at the stove surrounded by steam. He looked like a man rehearsing joy because he had decided to give it another chance. He told them about a customer who brought him a bag of apples as a thank you, as if gratitude were a currency that bought borrowed days. Noah let him talk because the truth would and it would not be kind. Emma asked for a minute alone with the laptop and went upstairs. She did not close the door. Closing doors teaches secrets to speak louder. The email from Uptown Collective arrived on schedule. Receipt attached. Vendor retainer confirmed. A PDF waited like a polite trap. Emma opened it and read. The form was clean. The numbers were real. The signature was a swirl made by someone who had practiced confidence in a mirror. She searched the signature. It belonged to a woman who did not exist anywhere else. She searched the address. It was a mailbox in a building that specialized in business names that never needed offices. She wrote the details in her diary like a small prayer facing a large appetite. The plan continued in whispers that sounded like everyday life. At dinner, Emma told Daniel that her teacher had assigned an interview project about small businesses, and could she talk to Melissa about how leases worked. Daniel smiled with that soft relief men make when luck offers them an alibi for their own doubts. Ask her anything, he said. She's honest. Emma did not correct him. Sometimes you let the word float by and you watch what it tries to attach itself to. Noah played the distracted teen so well the role fit like a borrowed jacket. He asked Melissa for help with the timer app she had installed on his phone. It keeps crashing, he said. She took the device with a sigh that sounded like patience and tapped through screens with the certainty of a person who had decided certainty was easier than truth. Noah watched the permissions blossom across the glass. Usage, location, network access, then vanish into a page that smiled like a babysitter. He asked if he could set the limits himself. She said she trusted him to try, but the app worked better when the parent set the rules. She handed the phone back and ruffled his hair the way people in magazines ruffle puppies. He went to his room and did what angry boys rarely do, he thought. If Melissa's app reported to a portal, he could find it by following the crumbs. He opened a browser and searched the developer. He found a help forum where parents complained the app was too strict and teenagers complained it was too smart. He found a line of code in a screenshot, a domain that listened quietly for the lives of children to report themselves. He matched the domain to his phone's traffic and saw the heartbeat. Every minute a ping. Every hour a summary. From the same IP another pulse, slower, heavier. His father's phone. He felt heat rise behind his eyes. Spying was a small word for what people did when they were too afraid to ask for respect. Down the hall, Emma printed the vendor's receipt and a list of every automatic transfer's timestamp. She did not like the sound of paper leaving the printer. It felt like a warning. She slid the pages into the inside pocket of her school binder under a geometry packet no one would steal. She believed in hiding important things inside boring things. She also believed in telling the truth in a way that did not break the listener. That would be the hardest part. She had learned numbers before she learned how to place soft hands on a hurting shoulder. The next afternoon, the children changed the plan from observation to arrangement. Noah said he wanted to see the shop space. Melissa beamed and said of course and told Daniel to come too. "Let's make it a family trip," she said. And the word family wobbled on her tongue like a glass set on a table that isn't level. Daniel agreed, grateful to be included in the future he was paying for. Emma asked if she could bring her school project questions. Melissa said she loved a girl with initiative. Emma registered the word love and placed it gently on a shelf where it could not cut anyone. The space was small, bright, full of promise the way empty rooms are before rent makes promises feel heavy. The landlord was not there. There was a folded chair near the window and 2 sample candles on a crate and a clipboard with sheets that looked official until you read the parts that mattered. Emma asked if she could scan the lease for school. Melissa laughed lightly and said they'd signed digitally, and she'd print it later. Daniel nodded as if later were a day that always arrives. Noah ran his fingers along the wall, counting the outlets the way some people count exits. "We'll need more light," he said. Melissa said light was the one thing she never ran out of. The room did not argue with her. Rooms rarely do. On the way home, Emma asked about the deposit. Melissa said the landlord liked cash because cash respected time. Daniel did not like cash. He liked records. He had once told the children that memory is a kind of ledger, and he kept both as clean as he could. He shifted in his seat and asked how much exactly went down. Melissa squeezed his hand. "Small numbers. Smaller than a dream." Emma watched his mouth soften. Words can turn a responsible man into a relieved one. Relief can be expensive. That night, the siblings performed their choreography. Noah sent a message from his phone to the apps portal that looked like a glitch but was not. In the response header, he found an administrator account name masked in friendly syllables and a password reset flow that checked recovery emails he did not recognize. He took a screenshot he would never share with any adult but Emma. He wrote down the time. He was not trying to be a hacker. He was trying to be a brother who could testify. Emma waited until the house dimmed into that hour when families who trust sleep. She opened the laptop and scheduled a transfer from the education account back into itself. A zero-sum movement an honest person would not notice and a dishonest one would flag with surprise. She labeled it with a note in the memo field. One word only, proof. If Melissa had set alerts to her email, the note would arrive like a stone thrown in a calm lake. If she had not, the lake would stay still and tell them something else. Emma closed the screen and made herself breathe like a girl who was not planning a sting operation inside her home. Morning brought confirmation. Melissa hovered over her phone at the sink with a face that looked like someone tasting soup that is not theirs. She put the device down too carefully. She poured coffee too quickly. She told Daniel she might need to swing by the bank because their system did something weird. The children did not look at each other. Looking is a language and sometimes languages betray you. Noah sat beside her on the ride to school and asked if the app on his phone could pause during classes because he kept missing notifications about group work. Melissa asked to see, opened the portal from her end, and toggled a switch in an account marked with the same soft syllables he had seen in the header. She did not panic, which told him the lake had rippled and she had pretended it was wind. He looked out the window and counted to 10 because counting is proof you remain the size of yourself. Emma spent lunch in the library printing 3 copies of everything and hiding each in a different cover. One inside a book about rivers, one inside a binder marked choir, a third tucked behind the photo of her mother in the little frame she wore in her backpack like armor. She did not consider what would happen if anyone found them. She considered only what would happen if they needed them and they were gone. The thought made her hands steady and her handwriting smaller. By late afternoon, a new message waited in the family email ghost. Final installment scheduled. Congratulations on your opening. The number was larger this time, bold as hunger. The education account would stagger but survive. The checking account would look fat and call it growth. Emma traced the comma with her finger and felt something inside her click. Not a lock. A decision. Noah asked to walk home the long way. Emma followed. He led her to the small park where their mother used to sit on a low wall and tell them that truth was not a knife. It was a light. People got hurt when you shined it without warning. We have to warn Dad, he said. We have to tell him everything right now and let the chips fall. Emma looked at the swings moving under a wind that had someplace to be. If we tell him now, she cleans the accounts before he finishes blinking, she said. If we wait one more day, we catch her hands inside the drawer. Noah pressed his palms into his eyes until stars came. I hate waiting. Emma did not tell him she hated it too. She told him the only thing that kept boys from breaking themselves open on the first door they found, one more day, isn't surrender. It's strategy. That evening, Melissa announced a celebration dinner at a place where the portions were small, and the plates were brave. She wore perfume that smelled like a story she hadn't lived yet. She toasted to beginnings and to believers and to the magic of people who saw the world not as it is but as it should be. Daniel lifted his glass and repeated the most dangerous sentence a good man can say, I trust you. Emma did not raise her water. She looked at the reflection of the ceiling lights in the tabletop and pictured them as constellations. She named them quietly: proof, pattern, promise. The bill arrived. Melissa reached for the card she had set in her wallet like a bookmark. Daniel reached too and laughed when she slapped his hand away in the playful way couples do when they want witnesses to believe in their chemistry. The card beeped and approved, and the waiter smiled because smiling is part of the uniform of people who see everything and keep it. On the way home, Melissa hummed. She was not a humming person. Humming is a sound builders make when a roof goes on. Thieves hum too, but only when they are close to the door. At home, she offered to clean the kitchen. Daniel objected. She insisted until the argument looked like affection. When he left the room, she took her phone from the counter and moved toward the back porch where reception was better. Noah did not follow. Emma did not follow. They let the night lean in and do the listening. Someone climbing stairs. Yes, she said to the person at the other end. The rest tomorrow morning. Don't message until after. Then softer. No, he doesn't know. The kids. They're kids. The sentence lifted at the end, a question sold as confidence. When she returned, the siblings were exactly where she had left them, which is harder than it sounds. Daniel announced a family movie. They made a nest of blankets that smelled like sun and old soap. The film talked, no one listened. When it ended, Melissa hugged Emma for too long. Emma let her. It is an art to let the people who hurt you think they are holding you together. After midnight, the house slept the way houses sleep when one heart inside is awake for everyone else. Noah sat at his desk with a notebook full of sprints. Emma lay on her side with her diary open to a new page. One more day, she wrote. One more step. We turn the tables by letting her set them first. Dawn arrived wearing forgiveness. The birds argued like they always did. Daniel packed leftovers into containers as if he were saving time. Melissa dressed in a white blouse that tried to look innocent and a jacket that tried to look earned. She told Daniel she would be at the bank, then the supplier, then the space. She asked if the children needed anything while she was out. Noah said no. Emma asked for receipts. Melissa laughed. You're relentless, she said, but her eyes did not laugh. They were two deep pools where someone had dragged a rock across the bottom. The moment the door shut, the siblings moved. Noah opened his laptop and launched the portal to the timer that thought it was a parent. He took screenshots of the administrator panel, not to trap a person but to trap a lie. Emma logged into the bank and refreshed the education account until the page felt the way hearts feel in waiting rooms. The pending line appeared. Transfer scheduled. She clicked. The confirmation numbers arranged themselves like soldiers in a row. She wrote them down, then did something she knew would change the shape of the hour. She initiated a hold. Not a cancellation, that would announce itself like an alarm, but a manual review request with a note in Daniel's name about potential fraud. It was the kind of request that put a human between a button and a mistake. Banks didn't always read hearts. They did read the word fraud. They did not tell their father. They made him coffee and asked about his day, to be kind. He kissed their foreheads and said they were the best thing he had ever made. And then he left for work believing that truth does not have to fight to be true. The children stayed behind to prepare for a different kind of class. At 10:30, Melissa called Daniel from the bank's parking lot and told him a small confusion had happened but everything was fine. She did not know that Noah had already forwarded the administrator screenshots to the family email with the subject line for Dad's eyes when the world is safe. She did not know that Emma had printed another set of documents and slid them into the inside lining of her jacket, where even a thief's hands would hesitate. She did not know that their mother's photograph in Emma's backpack had a second picture tucked behind it, a copy of the signature from the vendor receipt, big and silly and empty. Near noon, Emma's phone buzzed with a message from the bank. Please call to verify recent transfer requests. The text went to the number on file for Daniel, which was also the number on file for the family emergency alert. She looked at Noah. Now, she said simply. They called their father together. Emma asked him if he would swing by the bank on his lunch because she had a math question about how holds worked. He laughed and told her she couldn't wait to learn about everything. She said she already had. He did not hear what she meant and she forgave him. When Daniel stepped into the bank and gave his name, the human between the button and the mistake greeted him with a face that knew families. She asked if he recognized the pattern of transfers from the education account. He glanced at the amounts and said something men say when they don't want to disappoint anyone. Yes, it's for a project. The banker tilted her head and pointed to the memo that read proof. Daniel stared at the word as if it had written itself. He said he did not write that. The banker said it appeared on a non-posted transfer initiated internally, and the hold had been placed with a note about potential misuse. She did not say the word betrayal. Banks are careful with poetry. Daniel called Melissa from the parking lot. She didn't answer. He called again. She answered with a voice that was already building a story out of spare parts. She said the bank was confused. She said everything would be fine. She said he trusted her. He said he did. He looked at the paper in his hand and repeated the sentence anyway. When he hung up, he did not turn the key in the ignition. He sat and watched dust move in sunlight. He realized sunlight is not proof of anything except a window. At home, the children packed their evidence into a folder the color of courage. Emma wrote a note for their father in the margin of a page that contained nothing but numbers. This is not to hurt you. This is to keep you. Noah added, we are not revenge. We are your kids. They did not sign their names. They did not need to. The handwriting gave them away. By late afternoon, the transfers had stalled. The vendor sent a curt email asking for confirmation that the final installment would arrive as agreed. Emma pressed print and dampened the page with her breath, so the ink would remember a human had been here. Noah drafted a message to the vendor from the family account asking for a proper invoice with a tax ID and a physical office address. He ended it with a sentence that sounded like an adult's. Our accountant requires complete documentation for education-related funds. He felt ridiculous and powerful at the same time. He imagined the person on the other end wearing headphones and chewing on a pen and wondering when children had learned to talk like paper does. When Melissa came home, she carried shopping bags heavy with props. She laid out ribbons and tissue paper in glass jars and a square reader that could turn trust into transaction. She kissed Daniel as if kisses could staple a life in place. He kissed back slower than usual. She did not notice, which told the children she had begun to live in a movie where other people's lines didn't matter. Emma asked if she could help with labels. Melissa smiled and said of course and handed her a sheet with 3 fonts trying to be friends. Emma said she liked the simplest one. Melissa said the simplest things cost more. Emma said the simplest things last. They looked at each other across a small wooden table that held between them all the years that had led to this hour. Noah said he would take out the trash. He stepped onto the back porch and called a number he had found printed small on the bottom of the vendor receipt. The voicemail greeting said operations. He left a message that did not sound like a boy. He asked for the name on the bank account where the retainer went for tax reporting. He did not expect a call back. He received one 8 minutes later. The voice gave a name that was not the signature. It was a man's name that did not belong to a boutique or a landlord or a dream. Noah repeated it aloud after he hung up until the shape of it carved itself into metal. He wrote the name on a slip of paper, and slid it across the kitchen table to Emma, while Melissa laughed with Daniel in the living room about a social media post that had gotten crazy engagement. Emma did not react. She tucked the paper under her palm and felt it burn. She whispered the name to her diary and closed the book as if closing the book could keep anything inside. Night rose again, and with it the kind of quiet that asks people who they are. Daniel stood at the sink softening the edges of a plate with a sponge and asked Melissa in a gentle tone what anyone would ask, "Can we look at the lease together tomorrow?" She said absolutely and kissed the back of his neck. He asked if she preferred he transfer from checking instead of the education account. She said money was money when you were building a family legacy. He let the sentence sit between them until it decided to rot. Then he changed the subject. It is hard for a good man to hold a shape he has not practiced. The children did not sleep. Sleep belongs to houses where everyone is telling the same story. Emma lay on her side and pictured the education account as a small boat tied to a dock. She pictured a hand untying the rope in the dark and pushing gentle, so the boat drifted without waking anyone. She pictured grabbing the rope and tying it to her wrist. If the boat moved, she would move with it and the pain would wake her, and pain is better than panic because it is honest. At 3 a.m., Noah stood at his window and watched the street. He did not know why. He only knew that betrayal walks like any other person until you teach your eyes the difference. A car he recognized idled at the corner and then left. It might have been nothing. It might have been the man with the name. He sat back on his bed and did not tell his sister because some images are too heavy to share before morning. Morning came carrying decision. The bank's review triggered a request to speak with the account holders together. The vendor sent a second email with a PDF that looked like a bill until you read the details and saw there were no details. Melissa's phone lit with a text from a number saved without a name. Today. She replied with a single word, yes. The children took turns pretending to tie their shoes until the message disappeared. Emma approached Daniel while he laced his boots. She asked if they could stop by the bank after school because her project needed accurate information on how accounts protected families. The word protected does work on fathers. It builds bridges across doubts he is not ready to name. He agreed, then stroked her hair and told her he loved how her brain didn't let the world get away with sloppiness. She smiled and tried not to cry because tears would blur the ink on pages that could not afford smudges. Noah asked Melissa if she wanted him to come carry boxes at the space. He said it like a boy who had decided to be a man in the way men sometimes decide too soon. She said she would love his help in the afternoon after she finished a thing. He asked what thing. She said the boring kind. He said boring was his specialty. She laughed and told him not to grow into a bureaucrat. He said he would grow into a wall. By noon, Daniel stood between two lives. On one side, a banker who had seen this before with different names. On the other, a woman who kept promising explanation with a calendar full of tomorrows. The banker asked if he authorized transfers from the education savings to a vendor not associated with any school. He said he did not. Melissa texted him that signal was bad and she would call from outside in a minute. He stared at the word proof on the printout and thought about the 4 boxes in a little girl's diary he had not read. When the school day ended, the children did not walk home together. They arrived at the bank separately the way clocks arrive at the same hour by their own paths. Daniel was waiting with a face that had lost a layer. He held their folder like he was carrying a bird he did not want to scare. He asked them to sit. He asked them if they knew anything about a note on a transfer and a vendor that sold air. Emma nodded. Noah did not nod because nodding felt like victory and this did not. Daniel asked why they had not told him sooner. Emma said because stopping a thief requires timing and love, and they were trying to honor both. He closed his eyes and swallowed, and when he opened them he was a different father. Not harder, not colder, just sharper, like a picture brought into focus. The banker spoke in the practiced cadence of someone who walks other people back from cliffs while holding a clipboard. The transfer was on hold. The account would be locked to new rules until both parties authorized changes in person. Alerts had been restored to the primary number, which Daniel now held like a lifeline. There would be paperwork. There would be questions. There might be consequences. There could be recovery. Emma listened and felt a door inside her open, the one that leads to rooms labeled withstand. When they left, the afternoon light was gold and unkind. Daniel told them to go home and he would meet them there and they would talk as a family. He said family the way a carpenter says beam. He needed the word to hold. On the walk, Noah asked his sister if the plan was over. She shook her head. "We stopped the bleeding," she said. "Now we bring the heart back to itself." "What does that even mean?" he asked. She looked at the houses and picked one at random and imagined another little girl inside penciling truth into the margins of her life. "It means we're not done," she said softly. "It means the turning of the tables has to be seen, not just set." At home, they waited in a living room that had learned the weight of waiting. Emma arranged the pages on the coffee table in an order that told a story without needing a narrator. The alerts, the transfers, the vendor, the signature that belonged to no one, the administrator panel that belonged to everyone and therefore to no one, the note that said proof. She placed their mother's photograph at the top like a title. Noah paced lines into the rug that would never disappear. He wanted to smash something and he wanted to save something and he did not know which one was bigger. The front door opened and the whole house flinched. Daniel entered first, his jaw set with a quiet the children had never seen on him. Melissa came behind with a smile that had rehearsed too much. She saw the papers and laughed the way people laugh when they are about to teach a lesson they think only they know. She opened her mouth. Daniel raised his hand. Not like a threat, like a man asking a choir for silence. He looked at his children. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the table as if it were an altar. Then he looked at the woman who had moved into his home and asked to be called wife. He said her name once, not with anger, with accuracy. And in that breath before anyone spoke again, the room felt the weight shift. The tables had not turned yet, but the legs had loosened. The center would not hold for her much longer. It would hold for the ones who had built it. Outside, the sky considered rain again. Inside, the truth stood up and asked to be counted. In houses like ours, truth doesn't arrive like a trumpet. It comes like a draft under the door, a thin line of cold you can't ignore once you feel it. The living room held its breath while the evening sat down on the windowsill to watch. Papers waited in their careful rows. Our mother's photograph watched like a lighthouse. Daniel stood with his hand half raised, as if he could lift the room into a quieter world by asking it to be still. Melissa saw the pages and reached for the easiest story. She said someone must have misunderstood a routine business expense, and the vendor's name was just a processable. And of course education money was part of building a family business because what else was prosperity for if not the children's future? The words were smooth because she had polished them in her mouth all day. Daniel asked her to stop. He asked the way a drowning man asks for a rope. He didn't accuse. He asked for the simplest thing a life together needs, clarity. Did she authorize transfers from the education account? Did she reroute alerts? Did she sign with a name that wasn't on any lease? She held his gaze and told a half-truth that paced its cage like a lion that had forgotten how to hunt. She said she had moved a small portion with the intention to restore it the minute the launch began producing, and the alerts must have been a setting she didn't understand, and the vendor was a marketing collective recommended by a mentor. She said mentor with a softness that tried to hide a man's shape. Emma slid the vendor's email across the table. The line about the final installment lay under Melissa's hands like a snake waiting for a reason to move. Noah stayed silent because his voice would have lit the floorboards. Daniel asked gently who the mentor was. Melissa stared at the ceiling like people do when they need permission from something higher than consequences. She said a first name as if a first name could be innocent. Noah said the last name and watched her skin learn a new color. The man with the account. The man with the car idling at 3 a.m. Daniel didn't shout. He walked to the window and looked at the yard he mowed in straight lines. He had once explained to the children that mowing wasn't about grass. It was about making a piece of the world behave. Behind him, Emma's papers did their quiet work. Proof has a temperature. You can feel it from across a room. He asked Melissa when she had planned to tell him. She said she was telling him now. He said that wasn't the plan, that was being caught. The sentence didn't rise. It landed. Some betrayals try to escape by becoming pity. Melissa reached for tears that started like rain on a windshield on a day that refuses to storm. She said she had been lonely inside a house that remembered another woman more gently every year, and she had tried to build a space where she belonged, and she had wanted to gift the children a legacy that didn't begin and end with their mother's photograph, and she had been swallowing the feeling of being extra at someone else's table. Daniel listened as if he owed even her excuses the dignity of being heard. He said loneliness doesn't hand you a crowbar and tell you to pry at a child's future. Emma did not hate Melissa in that moment. She wanted to. Hating is simpler than holding your father's shaking in your peripheral vision, and the way your brother's breath comes wrong when he's trying not to break. She did the thing her mother had taught her. She turned the page. Turning the page doesn't erase a chapter. It just refuses to live forever inside it. Noah stepped forward at last and put the administrator screenshots beside the vendor receipt. He didn't look at Melissa. He looked at his father and said the words he practiced until they no longer tasted of blame. "We wanted you to see it before it finished," he said. "We wanted to stop the hurt where we could." Daniel nodded without moving his eyes from the table. He thanked his son and daughter in a voice that sounded like a person learning a new language while walking uphill. The bank had already placed the hold. The account would not bleed again that week. Recovery, the banker said, was complicated but possible. Complicated is the kindest word money ever learned. Daniel asked Emma to walk him through the pattern. She did steady and spare. Dates, amounts, pathways. She didn't add adjectives. He didn't need them. He asked Noah if the timer app sent data anywhere else. Noah showed him the portal's bones and then closed the screen because fathers shouldn't see the way surveillance calls itself love. He told Melissa he would not decide anything in anger. He would decide in the morning with the sunlight on the facts. She asked if she should pack a bag. The question landed between them like a coin tossed down a well. He said she should stay in the guest room. He did not say safe. He did not say trust. He did not say wife. He said guest room, and the house understood its assignment. That night, sleep was a story none of them could finish. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and wrote columns like a man trying to rescue order from a fire. Income, savings, education, leak, promise. He put a number beside each word, then drew lines between them until the page looked like a map home. He poured coffee he did not drink and stared at the steam until it stopped pretending to be smoke. In her diary, Emma wrote 2 sentences and let the rest of the breathe. "We saved the money today. Tomorrow we have to save the language." Lies had used their words. She wanted them back. Noah didn't write. He did push-ups until his arms shook and counted slowly to teach his body not to sprint when a wall appears. The wall would be morning. He decided to meet it walking. Morning came honest and ruthless the way real light is. Daniel made toast because his hands needed a simple task to finish. The children came down with faces arranged into something that could do school. Melissa stood at the threshold of the kitchen in clothes that tried to look temporary. She offered to make her case again. Daniel said no more cases. Today would be practical. He asked for keys, passwords, and a list of any account that touched their accounts. She handed him a ring, a folded paper, a string of characters that had once felt like power. He placed them beside the sugar jar like objects that needed to be named in a different language. They drove to the bank together because some roads must be walked in the open. Inside, the woman who knew families greeted them without surprise. She had a room that smelled like plastic and patience. Daniel authorized a lock on the education funds so that 2 signatures would be required for any movement. He switched alerts back to his device and added Emma as a view-only contact with a smile that said he had learned who sees in this house. He asked about reversing the transfers already posted. The banker explained processes that move as if they are doing you a favor. She mentioned the word affidavit. She mentioned recovering through the vendor's processor if the funds hadn't been swept. She mentioned a compliance officer who liked paperwork more than people. Daniel said he could like anyone who liked protecting children. Melissa said she had just wanted to get ahead. The banker looked at Daniel instead. When you work where money and love intersect, you learn where to put your eyes. On the sidewalk, Emma stood in the sun and let it warm her hair. She felt years older and exactly her age. Noah wanted to take his father's hand the way he used to when crosswalks felt like oceans. He settled for walking half a step behind him, a shadow in service to a lighthouse. Melissa's heels clicked a rhythm that did not belong to their street. Back home, Daniel asked Melissa for the lease. She said the landlord had it. He asked for the landlord's full name and not a first name that tried to be casual. She gave a name that could fit on a mailbox, and Emma typed it and found a building that had been sold last winter to a holding firm that used a P.O. box. Noah called the number posted on the leasing site and reached a man who did not know Melissa's name but knew the word waitlist. He asked if the address matched a micro-retail program. The man said no. Daniel watched the thin threads of a story tighten and then snap, one by one without theatrics. The truth doesn't need costumes. Afternoon turned as afternoons do, into a test none of them had studied for. The vendor sent an email in a different tone. It mentioned agreements and breach and collections. Noah replied with a request for the contract Melissa had signed and the tax ID tied to the account receiving funds. He CC'd Daniel and the banker and a compliance address that had replied once with a robot. He used a signature line that included Daniel's business letterhead, because sometimes borrowed authority saves a bridge from collapse. Emma wrote to the school counselor and asked if there were scholarships for families experiencing unexpected financial adjustments. She explained nothing and everything in 3 neutral sentences. The counselor wrote back with kindness that moved like water into cracks, and a list of programs that only open their doors when you say a private word, help. Emma saved the email in a folder named Spring, even though it was not spring. Hope keeps its own calendar. Around 4, a car pulled up the way cars pull up when they have been texting the house before they arrive. Noah recognized the make and the lazy confidence of a person who assumes the driveway is a welcome mat. The man who stepped out had a haircut that cost receipts and a shirt that asked not to be questioned. He walked to the door with a smile he probably used to win rooms. Daniel met him on the porch. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked. The man said Melissa's first name like a claim. He said he was here to pick up documentation. He said something about time-sensitive transfers. He said the word investors, the way salespeople clear their throats. Daniel said no documentation would leave this house. He asked the man for his last name. The man gave the same name Noah had written until it turned to metal. It did not sound better in person. Emma stood behind the screen and watched his mouth form the syllables as if names were passwords to doors he had already walked through elsewhere. Noah held his phone low and tapped record not for drama, but because accuracy sometimes needs help remembering itself. The man tried to look past Daniel into the living room. He saw the table with papers and a photograph in a frame that made an argument without speaking. He smirked the way people smirk when they think a family's pain is small enough to step over. He said everyone here should calm down because these were business arrangements. Daniel said business is what you do with strangers. Family is what you do with care. He did not move. The man glanced at his watch. He did not move. The man glanced at his watch, then at Melissa, who had hovered into view with a face that wanted to be 2 faces and wasn't good at either. She said they could talk elsewhere, and Daniel said they could talk here, and the man's smile thinned until it looked like a cut. Emma opened her backpack and laid out a new arrangement on the table. Not the evidence, he knew that now. Not the invoices, he could recite them. She laid out options. A scholarship list. A bank form for reversing vendor charges through their processor's dispute channel. A printout from the state site about fraud attached to family accounts. A letter template that began "to whom it may concern" on date an unauthorized transfer. She had filled in the date and left the rest blank. She wanted Daniel's hand to finish the sentence, so his body could remember the shape of owning the future again. Noah opened his laptop and pulled up the administrator portal one last time. He scrolled to the button that allowed an account owner to export a data subject report, a bundle of every log and permission and IP. He clicked request and watched a progress bar pretend to be honest. When the file arrived, he scanned the logs for the day Melissa had set the app. The IP matched their kitchen. The admin account matched the friendly syllables. The export included a field many people forget exists, a recovery number. It was not Daniel's. It was not Melissa's. It was the man's. Noah printed the page and placed it on top like a flag. Daniel read. And the map he'd drawn the night before acquired terrain. He looked at his children as if he were seeing them in a photograph taken from the future where he had done the right thing sooner. He said thank you to each of them separately, like vows renewed in a smaller chapel. He turned to Melissa and asked if she could see that what she had done lived in a different country than getting ahead. She said she saw fear. He said he saw choices. She said choices come from fear. He said courage is a choice too. He told her she could meet with him tomorrow at the bank to authorize the reversal requests and co-sign the new locks, or she could meet a different kind of door. He did not say police. He did not say court. He did not need to. The air said it for him. That night, The siblings lay on the floor of Emma's room with the lights off and spoke across the dark. Noah asked if this was what turning the tables felt like. Emma said maybe it wasn't dramatic, maybe it was just taking your seat back and eating the meal you cooked without someone else's fork in your hand. He laughed into the carpet. He said he kept seeing the porch and their father and the man who thought he could retrieve stolen futures like takeout. Emma said she kept seeing the moment Daniel didn't take Melissa's hand. That was when the room changed shape. She wondered if forgiveness would ever feel big enough to hold this. She wondered if that was even the right question. Their mother used to say forgiveness wasn't a bridge for the other person. It was a boat you keep for yourself so you can cross the same river later without drowning. Emma decided to build the boat, just not tonight. Morning did what morning does. It arrived without congratulating anyone. Daniel drove to the bank with a folder under his arm that now felt like armor instead of shame. Melissa sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded the way children do when they're told to sit still. She had not slept in the guest room so much as argued with the past under a blanket. The banker greeted them with the polite face you wear when you wish you could be the judge of a better world. Papers were signed. Locks were set. Disputes were filed. The vendor's processor accepted the claim into a queue that would move at the speed of snow. It was enough. Outside the bank, Melissa tried one last story. She said she could make everything right if he would let her finish the plan. Daniel said the plan had been to empty his children's tomorrows and call it a family business. He said that plan was finished. She asked if this was the end. He said endings are for books. Lives have consequences. When they came home, the children were at the kitchen table with their homework not touching their hands. Daniel sat down and told them what had been secured and what might return and what might not. He did not lie about the last part. Some money doesn't come back. Some trust doesn't either. But he laid out a path that looked like work instead of guesses, and the children exhaled the way people do when the person steering the car knows the map again. He told them he had called a counselor for the house, not because anyone was broken, but because houses gather dust in places you don't see, and sometimes someone has to point where to wipe. He told them they would cancel streaming services and eat spaghetti twice a week and sell the second car he never liked. He told them none of that would touch who they were. Noah said he was applying for a job at the hardware store after school. Emma said she would tutor quietly and not tell anyone she was 12 until they paid her. They all laughed at that because laughter is a room you can still enter when the rest of the house feels rented. Late that afternoon, a final piece clicked into place. The vendor responded to the dispute with a copy of a contract that used their family address but not their family names. The signature was that same swirl. The date didn't match the lease Melissa said she'd signed. The processor asked for confirmation that the signer had permission to move education funds. Daniel replied with the word no and attached a copy of the account agreement that required his authorization. Sometimes the machine wants a single human word to remember what it's guarding. As the sun dropped and made the living room gold again, the four of them sat in a new arrangement. Melissa at the far edge of a couch that had cushioned other kinds of evenings, Daniel in the armchair that had learned his weight, Emma on the floor with her legs folded like a question mark, Noah standing because stillness felt like treason to his ribs. Daniel said he would contact a lawyer tomorrow to discuss the cleanest way to separate their finances and their lives. Melissa asked if there was anything she could do to stay. He said what she could do had to start 3 months ago. She stood and walked to the door and turned the knob like a person leaving a borrowed room. She paused and looked back and opened her mouth. No words came. That finally was honest. The door closed softly, as if the house had decided to be kind to the wood even if it couldn't be kind to what had passed through it. Night wrapped itself around the roof. In the kitchen, Daniel washed 4 plates and put one back in the cabinet and used. Emma wiped the table and stacked the papers not as evidence now, but as a record of a family that decided it would write its own ending. Noah took the trash out with more tenderness than a bin deserves. Before bed, Daniel stood in the doorway of each child's room the way he used to when nightmares were visible. He told Noah he was proud in a voice that didn't shake. He told Emma she had saved something bigger than money, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to name it correctly. She said he didn't have to name it. He could just live it. He laughed because it was exactly the kind of sentence she would write in a diary and he was lucky to hear it aloud. When the lights clicked off, the house made a new sound, a quieter hum like a field after locusts, hurt, yes, but not empty. Somewhere a future tested its legs. Somewhere a small boat tied itself to a sturdy post. The tables had turned, not with spectacle, but with hands that knew how to lift and place and steady. And if anyone outside asked how children could outthink a grown woman who swore she knew the game, we would tell them the same thing every time. We didn't win by being louder. We won by not surrendering the truth to people who trade it for applause. Morning would bring paperwork and explanations and a dozen practical storms. But on this night, Act 3 ended with something better than victory. It ended with a family sitting closer to the center of itself. The chairs pulled in, the map redrawn, the promise not spoken, only kept. The day after the door closed softly, the house woke like a field after a storm. Stems bent, seeds still there. The air smelling of wet earth and second chances. Daniel brewed coffee without looking at the measuring scoop. The way a man cooks by memory when he doesn't trust instructions anymore. He set 3 mugs on the counter and then a 4th out of habit, and when his hand stopped in midair, he put the empty cup back like a word he chose not to say. There are mornings when you rebuild quietly, not because you are timid but because you respect the weight of beams. This was that kind of morning. Emma arranged her notebooks and the folder labeled Spring, then slid another thin folder beneath it with a title she had written at midnight. Tomorrow's. Noah taped a printout inside the pantry door that listed bills, due dates and small changes that add up to breathing. Cancel, pause, call, return. It looked like a grocery list for dignity. Daniel met with a lawyer whose office smelled like paper and peppermint. He spoke in short sentences the way people do when their throat is a narrow bridge. The lawyer listened, nodded, asked for dates, accounts, copies, and then said the part that matters most in this universe. We can do this without breaking you further. Civil, not criminal, at least for now. Freeze, audit, sever. The words moved like sandbags to a riverbank. None of them were heroic. All of them held. At home, Emma answered an email from the school counselor with a thank you that worked like a doorstop. Small, unnoticed by many, essential. She signed up for a scholarship seminar and a weekend workshop in a library basement, where fluorescent lights have watched generations of good kids plot survival without melodrama. She did not feel special. She felt on time. Noah started at the hardware store after school. He learned the difference between a 3-inch and a 2.5-inch screw by feel, the way you learn to tell truth from almost truth when you hold them enough. The manager showed him how to cut keys and he thought about doors. Who opens them, who changes the locks, who keeps a copy tucked in a wallet like a future. On his second day, a man came in for a padlock and stared too long at a display of safes. Noah sold him one and carried it to the car because helping is not the same as trusting. You can do the first while keeping your eyes open about the second. Gossip visited as it always does, smiling, curious, pretending to care. It arrived at the end of the driveway in the form of a neighbor who wanted to return a baking dish that hadn't been theirs in 6 months. The dish was a messenger. The neighbor's eyes kept glancing at the living room window like truth was a show. Daniel took the dish and said they were fine and then said nothing else because dignity is sometimes a sentence with a period. Emma from the hallway wrote a reminder in her diary. We owe the world nothing but the way we walk past our porch. Melissa sent a message 3 days after leaving. It was the kind of text that believes it is a letter, explanations shaped like gifts, blame wrapped in silk. She said she had done it for all of them, and if the timing had been better, the returns would already be proving her right. She said the vendor had misled her too, and perhaps they could fight together instead of against each other. She asked if she could come by for the scented wax molds she had left in the garage. Daniel waited an hour before responding, not to punish her but to unshake his fingers. He wrote, "Your molds will be boxed. Pick up at the porch between 12 and 2. Please do not enter the house. Finances and access are closed. Further contact through counsel." He reread it twice and heard his own voice again. Noah stepped onto the porch at 1:58, phone recording in his pocket and hands in his jacket. The car arrived at 2:07. Melissa approached with sunglasses that hid or reflected, he could not decide which. She lifted the box and said his name, soft as a lure. He said he hoped she was well. It was not reconciliation. It was posture. Behind the screen, Emma stood still and did not blink because blinking sometimes looks like wavering. Melissa left without trying the knob. Small mercies count. The vendor sent a follow-up asking for amicable resolution. Daniel's lawyer replied with 7 sentences and 2 attachments. The law can sound like a lullaby when it is on your side. A week later, the processor issued a provisional credit for the last transfer and opened a deeper review for the others. Money like rain comes back in inconvenient patches. Daniel told the children not to celebrate a credit that could be reversed. Emma said they were not celebrating money. They were celebrating a system that, once in a rare while, remembered which way the scales tilt. Emma began tutoring 2 seventh graders in algebra at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She charged what their parents insisted on and accepted less when the kids came with wrinkled bills and embarrassed eyes. She made flashcards that fit inside pockets and said, "Keep them with your bus pass. There are moments to flip both." Her students improved, not because she was a genius but because she treated them like people whose futures had receipts if they wanted them to. She walked home under streetlights that had outlived at least 3 sets of bulbs and thought, endurance is underrated. On Fridays, Daniel cooked spaghetti with a seriousness that would have been funny a month earlier. He tried new sauces the way some men flirt and decided he liked simple better. The kids teased him and went back for seconds anyway. He started keeping a legal pad on the kitchen counter where anyone could write something the house needed. At first the list was practical: batteries, dish soap, gas points, more flour. Then it got bold: visit colleges, open trust, scholarship page for mom's name. Emma added tomorrow's fun, 2 signatures required. Noah underlined it 3 times like a drumbeat. One evening, the man with the haircut and the watch returned with a different car and the same entitlement. He parked partially across the sidewalk as if rules were for people with cheaper shoes. Daniel met him halfway down the path so the grass wouldn't have to listen. The man smiled and called him buddy, then said something about legal recourse, then something about slander, then like an amateur magician, flashed a stack of printed emails he thought were papers. Daniel listened as one listens to a weather report for a city you're not in anymore. He said the bank and the processor were handling it, and any future visits would be considered harassment. The man asked if he understood the size of the opportunity he was walking away from. Daniel answered the way fathers do when their hands have learned to be both hammer and shield. My opportunity is inside hammer and shield. My opportunity is inside that house. The man laughed, but it sounded nervous, like a hinge that needs oil. He left slowly, as if slowness could translate into power. It didn't. The next morning, the lawyer called with a phrase that tasted like clean water: temporary restraining order. Not the kind that makes headlines, the kind that politely outlines the perimeter beyond which trouble should not wander. It was paperwork, yes. It was also a line in the sand that told the wind to behave. Noah stuck a copy on the fridge with the magnet shaped like a fish their mother had bought at a gas station when they were small. He said, "Now the law is in our kitchen." Emma said, "It always was, we just had to invite it to sit." At school, rumors took their shot and missed. Children caught the words stepmother and money and began to build a campfire out of them. But it rained. Emma carried herself like a girl who has no time for campfires that don't warm anyone. Noah deflected with a joke, and a look that told jokers there were lines under the laughter where fists could grow if needed. Most people are good at reading topographies they want to avoid. The rumors moved on to easier hills. Daniel started attending a support group one town over where men who never imagined they would be sitting in a circle practiced saying 2 new sentences: "I didn't see it," and "I'm learning now." He did not speak the first week. He brought cookies and left them on a table that appeared to have survived many apologies. On the second week, he said his first sentence out loud: "My kindness was weaponized." The men nodded as if he had said their names. On the third week, he told them about a 12-year-old who could turn numbers into rescue and a 15-year-old who had learned to record lies without recording his own rage. When he got home that night, he slept 4 hours in a row for the first time since winter. Some recoveries require a spectacle, others require a file folder and a calendar. The bank's deeper review crawled forward. The provisional credit hardened into real money for one transfer, then half of another. The lawyer negotiated with a tone that could have convinced a locked door to consider therapy. Melissa's counsel reached out with the first rational proposal since any of this began. Return remaining funds, formalize separation, agree on a script for what would be said to the world. Scripts make some people feel safe. Daniel declined the script but accepted the return. He did not care about the narrative, he cared about his children's tuition. The check cleared. Money has no memory, but it can still be forgiven. On a Saturday that tasted like oranges, Emma told Daniel about the tomorrow's fund. A savings account that would live under a trust with 2 signatures required, one of them hers until she left for college, both of them to be a promise to their mother that math would keep hearts honest. Daniel asked if that was a burden she wanted. She said it was a boat, not a stone. He took her to the bank and the banker, who knew families, smiled because she got to make a good file that day. They signed papers and Emma slid her finger across her name like tracing a coastline on a map. Noah stood behind them, a lighthouse in a black hoodie. They celebrated with ice cream the way winners who don't trust victory do. Small, quick, grateful without bragging. Noah stole Emma's sprinkles and she didn't complain because she had brought a secret bag of her own. Daniel tried a flavor called Earl Grey honey and said it tasted like a smart person telling the truth. They laughed at him until they realized he was right. 2 weeks after the door closed, Melissa wrote again. This time it was not a letter disguised as a text. It was an apology that did not ask for admission back into the house. She said she could see now the shape of what she had done, not just the numbers. She said she would send a full list of anyone who had touched their money and anyone who tried to, with dates, emails, and signatures real and fake. She said she hoped one day the children would remember her as someone who learned too late, not someone who never learned at all. Emma read the message twice and replied with a sentence her mother would have called merciful geometry. Thank you for the list. Healing is happening here, whether or not you see it. Daniel forwarded the list to the lawyer and the banker. Noah highlighted the parts that matched his logs. Consistency is the cousin of justice. A few names on the list stung. A friend of a friend who had nodded in their kitchen was on it, smiling next to a number that did not belong to him. Betrayal is rarely a solo act. The circle got smaller again, the way circles do when you erase until the chalk is only as wide as the people who deserve to stand inside it. On a Wednesday evening that looked like a painting of ordinary life, they held what Emma called Truth Night. They didn't invite anyone but themselves. They set the table with spaghetti and a jar of store-brand sauce. They lit 2 candles from a box that had belonged to no one but them. They went around and said one thing they were afraid of and one thing they were building. Daniel said he was afraid of his own softness and building boundaries that weren't walls. Noah said he was afraid his anger would trick him into thinking he was strong and building muscle that knew when to lift and when to let go. Emma said she was afraid of becoming a ledger instead of a person and building a life where numbers serve love instead of replacing it. After dinner, they took out the box of photographs that families put off because looking means time travel. They made a pile for Mom's laughter, another for holidays, one for days that are only days, and one more for the pictures that were mistakes and yet captured something true anyway. The blurred foot of a child mid-run, the corner of a smile that didn't reach the lens in time. Melissa did not appear in many pictures, and in the one she did, she was placed at the edge, as if the camera had known before they did. Emma didn't tear any photo. She didn't erase. She put them back in the box in a new order, not as a rewrite but as a record of the river and its rocks. The lawyer called with an update that sounded like a bell rung in a distant tower. The processor had sided with them for the largest transfer. A final review remained on a smaller amount that might be gone forever. Daniel exhaled like a man setting down a heavy backpack at a campsite. He looked at the calendar and saw 3 appointments for college fairs circled in blue pen, Noah's work shifts in pencil, Emma's tutoring hours in fine point, and 2 more support meetings noted with a small star. He stood at the counter and realized the legal pad of needs had become a ledger of progress. He left it there and went to knock on his children's doors, not to check on them, but to say goodnight with a word he had avoided before, proud. They were not saints. There were arguments. Noah wanted the car that had been listed for sale to stay 1 more month so he could drive to work and back without taking 2 buses. Daniel said buses teach the body patience in ways cars don't. Noah said he had enough patience. Daniel said he believed him and also no. Emma once snapped at both of them when they talked about money loudly enough to make the house look poor on purpose. She then cried because she hated that tone in her own mouth. They recovered quickly because recovery was now their language. Spring pressed a hand against the glass. The library workshop announced scholarships Emma could name without reading from her notes. The hardware store offered Noah more hours and a raise because he had convinced a contractor to buy in bulk with quiet facts. Daniel's support group invited him to speak about the 2-signature trust and the kitchen legal pad, and he did without turning his children into props. Later, a man in the circle asked him how you keep your heart open after a season like that. Daniel said opening wasn't the problem, aligning was. He said he'd learned to point himself like a compass to the same center as his kids. On a warm Saturday, they drove to a community college open house not because Emma had decided on it but because you visit steps even if you plan to climb higher. The campus was honest. Brick that new weather, students who walked with heads full of rent and theories. Emma collected brochures like puzzle pieces and asked a dean about transfer partnerships. The dean lit up because a 12-year-old talking like that reaffirms something that paperwork can't measure. Noah found the automotive lab and asked a professor if torque was just anger with a textbook. The professor laughed and said yes and no and then offered him a tour that smelled like grease and pride. Daniel stood at the edge of both conversations and let the future talk to his children directly without translating through him. It felt like forgiveness for the parts he had missed. They came home and found a letter in the mailbox that changed the flavor of the afternoon. The processor's final review had resulted in a partial recovery of the second transfer. The details were exactly as boring as integrity should be. The money would arrive in trickles, but it would arrive. Daniel sat on the steps and read the letter twice, then handed it to Emma, who handed it to Noah, who did not fist pump because some victories don't want cheerleaders, they want stewards. That night, they drafted the mission statement for the Tomorrow's Fund. They argued over adjectives and then removed most of them, leaving verbs and nouns like steal and cedar. Protect, educate, build, require, review. Emma insisted on one sentence that didn't sound like a form. This money belongs to the future of the children and will not be used to impress the present. Daniel underlined it. Noah added a clause about mentorship. 1 hour a month every month they would sit together and look at the numbers and the goals, so that no account ever lived in a dark corner again. They all initiated the page, not because they needed to but because touching ink together felt like a new holiday. Before sleep, Emma opened her diary and wrote, "We did not punish. We placed. We did not perform. We proceeded. The table is ours again. We eat slowly." She tucked the diary under her pillow the way some people tuck a small prayer. Noah lay on his back and stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine anger with nothing to push against. He decided to keep some anyway, not as fuel but as memory, the way you keep a burned match in a jar to prove to yourself that it did its job and you didn't need a wildfire. Daniel stood in the doorway between their rooms and saw two people who had taught him how to be brave in a way that doesn't look good on posters. He whispered thank you to the empty hallway and meant it as a promise to the walls and the roof and the floor, to the house that had witnessed their worst and agreed to stay. Then he turned off the light and went to his room, where a legal pad, a stack of returned funds and a photograph waited, not as a shrine to what was lost, but as a witness to what had been kept. Outside, spring insects tuned their tiny instruments. Inside, a family tuned itself to a key they intended to keep. The story did not shout. Didn't need to. The truth had taken its seat and would not be getting up for anyone who arrived late with a better smile. Forgiveness looks gentle from far away. Up close it's work, rough, repetitive, a kind of mending that blisters the hands. Weeks had passed since Melissa left, and the house had found its rhythm again, though not the same rhythm as before. Silence had returned, not as absence but as balance. Dishes clinked without tension. Laughter arrived without permission, and the air carried no secrets heavy enough to bend the ceiling. Daniel learned to live with unfinished things. He left the extra cup in the cupboard now, not as a ghost but as a reminder. Every evening he'd walk into the kitchen and hum a line from an old song he couldn't finish. Some memories don't ask to be erased, they just want to stand quietly in the corner until they feel safe again. Emma had grown in ways she didn't measure. She'd stopped writing only about suspicion and numbers. Now her diary held paragraphs about rebuilding, recipes she wanted to learn, quotes her mother once said that she only understood now. Wisdom doesn't shout, her mother had written on a sticky note years ago. It waits for you to stop defending your mistakes. Noah's job at the hardware store turned him into someone who looked at everything and thought in verbs: tighten, secure, brace, fix. He started coming home smelling of sawdust and rain, his palms lined like small maps of effort. Daniel noticed how much he resembled his late wife now, not in features, but in the way he filled the room with quiet steadiness. Money came back slowly and stubbornly, like spring in a city that doesn't believe in second chances. One recovery letter after another arrived from the bank, confirming that the last fraudulent transfer had been reversed. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to fund Emma's dream and prove that truth, once dug out of the ground, can grow again. Daniel stood with the final letter in hand that morning, sunlight warming the paper. He didn't call the children right away. He just stared at the date and thought about the woman he'd married. The one who had smiled at pancakes and taken their trust one small bite at a time. He didn't hate her anymore. Hate is a heavy coat. Eventually you get tired of carrying it through good weather. When he told Emma and Noah, they didn't cheer. Just nodded, as if acknowledging that justice had finally caught its breath. Emma said quietly, "The rest isn't about money, Dad." He asked what she meant. She said, "The rest is about remembering we didn't lose each other." He nodded and thought that she'd said the one thing he couldn't. Later that evening they sat together going through the things Melissa had left behind. Boxes of unfinished candles, invoices, notebooks full of plans that now read like fiction. Noah joked that they could resell the candles as lessons learned. Daniel smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "We don't need to profit from mistakes," he said. Emma disagreed softly. "Maybe not profit, but we can repurpose them." She melted the old wax, mixed new scents, and poured them into jars labeled resilience, recovery, and rebuild. They weren't for sale. They were reminders. Summer brought warmth that didn't feel borrowed. Daniel spent weekends repainting the porch with Noah. Every brushstroke was a small confession. They didn't talk much while they worked, and they didn't need to. Fathers and sons speak better in shared silences. Emma sat nearby, reading aloud pieces of essays she was drafting for a scholarship competition, essays that talked about loss without bitterness, about learning accountability before adulthood. Her words filled the space between hammer strikes. The first scholarship result came in August. Emma had won. A letter written in neat blue ink said she'd been chosen not just for her grades, but for her essay about ethical courage. She read the last line aloud at dinner. "When truth costs something and you still choose it, that's what defines you." Noah clapped, Daniel's eyes wet without warning, and the old house seemed to breathe out a thank you. That night, Emma placed the scholarship letter beside her diary. She opened a new page and wrote, "We didn't just get our money back. We got our meaning back." Around the same time, Melissa's attorney sent word that she wanted to return a small portion of her profits from a joint venture that had dissolved. Daniel asked the lawyer to donate it to a charity under the children's mother's name. He didn't need it back in the house. He just needed the circle closed. Noah was there when the letter from the foundation arrived, confirming the donation had been made. He read the words slowly, the way people read tombstones they've learned to forgive. Then he folded the paper and said, "That's enough." Life began to move at a pace that didn't demand apology. Daniel started fixing up his old truck again. The one he used to drive the kids to the was still alive. Emma packed for her college visit. Noah began evening classes to study mechanical engineering, his way of turning the art of repair into a life's purpose. One quiet Sunday, they sat together under the oak tree in the backyard. Emma had brought lemonade. Noah had his notebook of designs. Daniel had the candle labeled resilience burning beside him. The sun slanted through the branches like forgiveness finding its way home. "Dad," Emma said softly, "do you think people like Melissa ever realize what they lost?" Daniel took a long breath before answering. "Maybe," he said. "But realizing doesn't mean repairing. Some people learn too late that love isn't a resource to exploit. It's a trust to earn." Noah tossed a pebble across the grass. "Then we learned early," he said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "You did. You both did." They stayed there until dusk, watching fireflies spark across the lawn. The kind of light that's brief but unforgettable. The kind that reminds you healing isn't loud, it's a steady glow returning after the darkness forgets to hold on. When they finally went inside, the house felt lighter than it ever had before. Emma paused in the hallway and looked at the spot where Melissa's portrait once hung. The wall was empty but not bare, it was peaceful. She smiled and whispered, "That space belongs to us now." In her diary that night, she wrote her last entry for that chapter. "Some people teach you how to love. Others teach you how to protect it. We learned both. And in learning both, we grew up." Outside, a gentle wind passed through the porch, moving the curtain just enough to stir the candle flame. It flickered once, then stood steady, small, bright, and sure. "Perfect, brother." I'll continue the story in full cinematic narration. Act 6, long and deeply emotional, carrying the story months forward into a true resolution where time, growth, and quiet strength rebuild everything that betrayal tried to break. Here we go. Time has a strange mercy. It doesn't always erase what hurts, it simply teaches you how to carry it better. By autumn, the house on Willow Creek looked different, not because of renovations but because peace changes architecture. It softens corners, brightens rooms, and fills silence with something like music. The leaves outside had begun to trade their green for gold. Each morning, Daniel opened the window and let the cold air come in. He liked the sound through the curtains, like the house breathing in forgiveness. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, not nervously. The rhythm of life had returned, unannounced but loyal. The children had grown, not just taller or older, but into themselves. Grief had sharpened their insight, but healing had taught them gentleness. Noah now carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knows what he's capable of. He still worked at the hardware store after school, saving every dollar for his first truck. He said it wasn't about transportation, it was about ownership, about having something that no one could ever take. Emma was thriving in her scholarship program, splitting her time between essays, tutoring, and weekend workshops on leadership. Her teachers said she was wise beyond her years, but Daniel knew wisdom was just pain that decided to be useful. At night, she still wrote in her diary, but the words were no longer battle reports. They were seeds. Thoughts about kindness, hope, and the responsibility of knowing how to rebuild. Sometimes she still dreamt about Melissa, not nightmares, just distant echoes. In those dreams, Melissa wasn't cruel, she was simply lost, pacing a corridor full of closed doors. Emma would wake and stare at the ceiling, wondering if people like that ever find the right one to open. Daniel had found his own rhythm again. Work was steady, and his reputation, the one that had been quietly bruised when Melissa's lies trickled through town, had started to recover. He'd learned the art of calm explanations, not defensive, not bitter, just true. When someone brought up the story, he told them that lessons are expensive, but worth it if they buy you peace. And peace, he'd learned, is a house that needs daily sweeping. Every Sunday evening they kept a ritual. They called it ledger night, though no one talked about money anymore. It began the week after they received the last reimbursement from the bank. Daniel had suggested it as a way to stay accountable, to never again let silence grow where truth should live. They'd sit at the dining table, light one of Emma's handmade candles, usually the one labeled resilience, and talk about everything that mattered: work, school, fears, plans. On one such Sunday, Daniel told them he'd been offered a promotion at work, a regional position that meant more travel but also a chance to move forward. He hesitated, unsure if leaving them for weeks at a time was wise. But Noah grinned and said, "You've been teaching us how to run things, Dad. Maybe it's time you remembered you still can." Emma agreed. "Go build again," she said. "We'll keep the fort." It was strange hearing those words from her, so similar to what her mother once said the day Daniel had started his first contracting job. The memory hit him like warm sunlight. He nodded, and for the first time in a long time the future didn't feel like a hill. It felt like a road. He took the promotion. The next months tested what they had rebuilt. With Daniel gone 3 or 4 days a week, the kids learned to manage the home on their own. Emma handled the schedules, the bills, the messages from the school. Noah took care of repairs, the lawn, the grocery runs. They didn't do it because they had to, they did it because they could. Responsibility had become their inheritance. But life, as always, has its ways of checking if you've truly learned. It began with a letter, thin, formal, and printed in a serif font that always means business. It arrived on a Friday when the air smelled of rain and old leaves. Emma found it wedged under the door after school. The return address was a law office. The name beneath it made her stomach drop. Melissa Carter. She read it twice before opening. Inside was a short letter, handwritten, her stepmother's handwriting, neat but tired. It said, "I'm leaving town for good. I've accepted that what I did can't be fixed, but I can still try to make amends. There's a small savings account in your father's name that I opened after the settlement. I've transferred the remaining funds there. You can ignore this letter if you wish, but I needed to close this chapter the right way. Tell Daniel and the kids I hope their peace lasts longer than my pride." There was no return address. Emma stood by the kitchen window, staring at the rain streaking the glass. She didn't feel relief. She didn't even feel vindication. What she felt was something quieter, the strange ache of closure. Not forgiveness yet, but its shadow walking toward her. He stood, walked to the window, and saw the faint outline of snow beginning to fall. The world looked clean again, like it was starting fresh. He whispered into the glass, as if the night could carry it, "We made it." In January, Emma received another letter, this time from a university she hadn't even dared to apply to. Someone from her scholarship program had submitted her essay to a national contest. She had won. Full scholarship, mentorship, and a stipend. She read it 3 times, then sat down and cried quietly. Not from surprise, but from confirmation. This can echo louder than betrayal if you keep choosing it. When Daniel came home that evening and she handed him the envelope, he didn't speak. He just hugged her hard, the way parents hug when words are too small to hold pride. Noah jumped in too, wrapping them both until they were one shape of joy. The candle on the table burned down to its end. No one noticed. The following months moved with the gentle speed of stability. Daniel traveled, Noah studied, Emma prepared for college. The house filled with small sounds again. The kettle's whistle, the slam of doors, laughter that echoed down hallways that had once been too quiet. The walls that had held their worst days now held something stronger, rhythm. And yet, sometimes late at night, Daniel still thought of Melissa. Not with bitterness but curiosity. He wondered where she'd gone, what her life looked like when the pretending stopped. Maybe she found peace too in some small quiet way. Maybe not. But he didn't need the answer anymore. Closure, he'd learned, isn't knowing. It's deciding not to chase what doesn't belong to you anymore. Spring came early the following year. On the anniversary of the day the truth first came out, the family visited the park near the library, the one where Emma used to sit sketching plans to catch a thief. They brought sandwiches, a blanket, and a little box containing the last candle from the batch labeled Resilience. They sat under the same oak tree, older now but still standing. Daniel lit the candle and placed it between them. The flame burned slow and golden, refusing to bow to the breeze. Emma said, "I used to think turning the tables meant revenge, but it really means rewriting the story." Noah nodded. "And we wrote ours," he said. Daniel looked at both of them. His children, his proof, his redemption. "You didn't just turn the tables," he said softly. "You built a new one." They stayed there for hours talking about the future. About Noah's plan to study engineering, Emma's upcoming departure, and Daniel's decision to start mentoring other single parents in his support group. None of it was glamorous. All of it was good. When the candle finally melted into itself, Emma closed the lid on the box and whispered, "We can rest now." As they walked back toward the car, the wind lifted small petals from the ground, the first signs of spring. They drifted around them like blessings, like pages from a book that had finally reached its ending. That night, the house stood still under a pale moon, the kind that doesn't show off but illuminates enough to find your way. Daniel sat at his desk, opened his old journal, and wrote something he'd never dared to before. Peace isn't when life stops hurting. It's when you stop needing it to. He closed the journal, placed it beside Emma's last candle, and smiled. The story had begun with not of money but of meaning. Outside, the wind carried a faint sound, the laughter of 2 children who had grown into guardians of truth. The tables had turned long ago. Now they simply stood firm. And in that quiet house on Willow Creek, under the calm hum of midnight, the family slept together, whole and finally home. The season turned without asking permission. One morning the lawn woke with a thin frost that made every blade of grass shine, and by afternoon the sun had melted it into ordinary green again. That was the year the house learned to hold 2 kinds of time at once, the slow kind that heals and the quick kind that takes you away. They packed Emma's life into 3 boxes and a book bag with the broken zipper she refused to replace because it still worked if you were patient. The night before she left, she sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor and made a small pile of things that wouldn't travel well. Jar candles labeled with careful hands, a Polaroid of the 3 of them at the oak tree, the ledger page where the Tomorrow's Fund mission had been written in thick, sure ink. She didn't need to carry them, they would carry her. Daniel came to the doorway and leaned there without speaking. The light from the hall made a rectangle across her carpet, dust moved inside it like quiet snow. He said he had looked up the town where her dorm stood, he'd memorized the exits, the coffee shops open after 10, the walk from the bus stop to her building. She smiled without looking up and told him not to scout a battlefield that wasn't there. He laughed gently and admitted he would probably keep scouting anyway, because some habits are how love keeps its shape. Morning tasted like road maps. The car was warm from idling. The heater clicked, the vents sighed. Noah packed her boxes the way he tightened bolts at the store, one more twist past what most people think is enough. They drove with the radio low in the worldwide. Emma watched the horizon and felt a familiar ache. Leaving is a cousin of loss, but it carries a suitcase full of hope if you let it. The campus was red brick in late sun. Fresh paint on a railing, a line of new students with nervous eyes, a woman at a folding table handing out lanyards like keys to a city. Emma's dormitory smelled like laminate and laundry detergent. 100 beginnings stacked floor by floor. Her roommate, soft-voiced, brave, smiled, hung a string of tiny lights above the window. They looked like captured stars. Emma unpacked quietly, placing her mother's photo on the desk, the scholarship letter in the top drawer beneath a stack of blank notebooks, the candle labeled resilience back into the box because rules forbade flames. She didn't need the flame. She had learned to carry the idea. Daniel stood in the hall pretending to read a flyer. Fathers practice their exits like speeches. Noah tested the window latch, then tested it again. He set a small toolkit under Emma's bed and said it was for repair emergencies. She told him she would use it to assemble a life. They all laughed and then fell silent in the same second. Hugs lasted longer than usual but did not cling. Emma walked them to the car and made herself wave before the taillights turned. So often courage is just the discipline of the hand. Back home, the house practiced a quieter echo. Ledger night became a video call. The candles swapped for a lock screen's glow. Emma spoke about professors who asked good questions and hallways that smelled like winter coats. She said the library had a corner where the light never quite reached, and she liked to sit there because it reminded her that not everything needs to be bright to be useful. Daniel shared photos from the road, gas station sunsets, a coffee cup beside a stack of contracts, the kind of motel curtains that make a traveling father miss his children deeper than sleep. Noah added inventory lists for his growing side work. Neighbors needed fence repairs. Someone wanted a gate that didn't bang. A retired music teacher asked if a grandson's broken bunk could be made to hold history. Noah made things hold. Distance did not weaken what they built. It asked them to prove it. There were days the proof was expensive. Emma learned that intelligence and belonging are not the same thing. Her third week, a boy in her ethics seminar said something careless about people who stayed with the wrong partners. How could they not see? Emma felt heat rise and a voice inside say not today, then watched her hand lift anyway. She explained, gently and sturdily, that love wears disguises money recognizes, that access is a tool thieves carry without calling themselves thieves. The room changed temperature. The professor thanked her. The boy apologized on the walk out. She wrote 2 lines about it in her diary, and then did her homework. Rage would not steal what diligence could earn. The rumor arrived in November the way rumors travel, on the breath of someone who doesn't mean harm but enjoys the taste of almost true. A girl from another floor asked softly if Emma's stepmother had gone to prison and if Emma had used that settlement money to get into school. Emma stood very still, the way a tree stands when wind tests old branches. She said facts, not fire. The law had done what it could. No one wore orange because the system preferred paperwork to spectacle. The scholarship came from essays with no room for pity. She added, because she had decided to become a person who leaves rooms better than she found them, that pain is not a currency and should never be spent to buy belonging. The girl flushed and nodded and later left a note. I'm sorry. Thank you for teaching me kindly. Emma kept the note not as a trophy but as proof that correction can be soft and still work. Noah learned new math at the hardware store. Time plus honesty equals trust. He started picking up evening jobs that turned into Saturday ones, a slow river of small invoices becoming a map. He saved every receipt and wrote each number twice because once is how mistakes happen. One customer asked for a cash discount and a small lie about the scope. Noah swallowed the easy yes and told him no. The man frowned and hired him anyway. Being reliable is a rumor you want spread. On Sundays when Daniel didn't travel, the two of them fixed the porch they had repainted months earlier. The boards had held, the rail had not. They measured, cut, sanded, fitted. Sawdust settled on Daniel's hair and made him look younger. He talked about the support group with the tone a man uses when he's grateful for a room he doesn't want to need. He had started mentoring newcomers, men who sat with fists in their pockets and shame on their tongues. He told them his kindness had been weaponized and his naivete had been rented out at interest. And then he told them about 2 children who turned numbers into shields. The men leaned forward. Some nights, hope needs proof in the shape of a story. In December, Emma came home on a bus that carried everyone else's holidays too. She stepped off into air that smelled like cinnamon and wet pavement. Daniel hugged her and felt the small weight of textbooks through her coat. Knowledge is heavy and worth it. At home, the first thing she did was place the candle box back on the mantel, unlit. A symbol returned to its shelf like a banner after a long march. Noah took her to the workshop in the garage. A collection of tools and wood that used to be just a corner, now a room with rules. He had stenciled a phrase across a plank. Measured twice. He grinned and added, trusted once. They did not talk much about Melissa. They did not scrub her out of sentences either. Sometimes stories lose their power when you stop feeding them with nouns. On the second night of Emma's visit, Daniel pulled 3 envelopes from the drawer. Final confirmations from the bank, a settlement receipt, a letter from the processor that used more words than necessary to say we recognized what was wrong and tried to make it right. He asked if they wanted to keep these in the safe or burn them in the fire pit, and watch the paper turn into a lesson with smoke. Emma said neither. Let's file them like deeds, she said. Proof of what we own now. They slid the papers into a folder labeled record. Naming is a way to finish. Winter was honest. The pipes complained. The truck's battery died twice and then recovered with stubborn dignity. Daniel bought cheap salt and spread it like a blessing across the walk. On New Year's Eve, they cooked spaghetti and nothing else, then went outside just before midnight to listen to other people's fireworks paint the sky. Noah said the loud ones felt like bravado. Emma said the quiet pop after a faint spark was her favorite. Daniel held his children close and made no resolutions. He had learned to trade vows for habits. January took Emma back to campus and brought Noah a test he did not see walking up the driveway. A man in a crisp jacket knocked at sundown, a slim folder under his arm. He had heard about Noah's work and had opportunities that would scale his talent, access to bigger clients, a vendor account for materials at insider rates, a logo and website done for you, because craft needed polish to be paid. The pitch arrived dressed in compliments and left dressed in urgency. If you want in, you have to move before quarter end, the man said, as if quarters were seasons and a person's life were a trading chart. Noah felt the old heat rise, the thrill of a shortcut, the shame of almost wanting it. He asked for details. The prices were fog, the percentages slid. The man promised a contract after a handshake. Noah remembered a porch, a watch, a smirk. He said he had a policy. Anything that touched his future met his lawyer's eyes first. The man laughed like someone who doesn't need approval. Noah repeated the sentence. The man left with a business card that felt like a mirror. Noah stood in the doorway and breathed until his pulse admitted it had somewhere else to be. He wrote the exchange down and added a title, almost. Sometimes your ledger needs a page for temptations that failed. February mailed Emma a winter she had never met. Sideways snow. A campus that squeaked underfoot. She learned to wrap scarves the way older students did. Learned to drink coffee that tasted like determination. She joined a study group where kindness was a requirement and correct answers were a team sport. On Fridays, she volunteered at the campus resource center, helping students who wore hunger like a second jacket fill out forms that transformed I can't into I can with help. She became good at saying, we'll do this together, and meaning it. She still called home on ledger night. Sometimes the calls were short assignments, shifts, miles. Sometimes they were long. The philosophy professor who cried when a student described forgiveness as a choreography. The single dad at Daniel's group who admitted for the first time that he was afraid of Sundays. The old woman who brought Noah lemonade while he fixed her fence and told him that strong hands hold better when the heart is soft. Stories braided across the screen and made the distance feel like part of the design. March brought a letter addressed to all 3 of them. The seal on the flap was official. The return address colder than law. The board of the Scholarship Foundation wanted Emma to speak at a spring gala about ethical courage. She laughed when she read the phrase aloud. The words sat heavily. Bravery rarely feels like the correct label when you're just living through your only option. But she said yes because sometimes your story pays rent for someone else's tomorrow. The night before the gala, Daniel told her how proud he was without making pride her burden. He said if the stage felt like too much, she could choose a smaller room. And if the room felt like a test, she could walk out. She asked if he'd be disappointed. He said disappointment is a word people use when they confuse their hopes with someone else's life. She filed the sentence beside others she would borrow later. She stood at a wooden podium in a hall that had seen too many fundraisers and found a quiet way to tell the truth. She did not name villains. She named choices. She described a savings account called Tomorrow's and a day it learned to grow teeth. She spoke of a boy who learned to turn his anger into accuracy, and a father who discovered that kindness without boundaries is not kindness at all. She ended with a single line that was not hers but now belonged to her voice. Protection is love doing math. The room exhaled as if someone had opened a window. Afterward, a woman with a badge that opened doors told Emma that another scholarship would be added to her package, not because of the speech, but because of the work the speech made visible. Emma said thank you and nothing else. Gratitude unadorned travels farther. Spring leaned in. The oak at home unfurled its first leaves very slowly, like someone testing a healed wrist. Daniel's promotion settled into something like normal. He learned which airports had soft chairs and which coffee shops counted refills without judging. He brought back small gifts that lived between joke and love. A keychain wrench for Noah, a bookmark that said read bravely for Emma, a postcard with a watercolor of a lighthouse for the fridge. On the back he wrote simply here. Noah's side jobs became a name stenciled on a board above the garage, Willow Creek Repairs. Not a company yet, but a sign. He made a simple website at the library with 3 pages. What I do, what it costs, how to reach me. The grammar was plain and perfect. Calls came slow and steady. He turned down a partnership that sounded like debt with marketing and accepted a mentorship from the professor who had laughed about torque. Twice a month, they met in the back of the auto lab and talked about materials and margins and when to walk away. The professor told Noah he had a good ear for machines. Noah knew he meant people. Emma came home for spring break with a suitcase full of laundry and a head full of plans. She and Noah repainted the living room not because it needed color but because they did. They chose a shade that looked like quiet mornings. While rollers slid up and down the wall, Emma told him about a girl in her dorm who hid her hunger with bright clothes and a big laugh. They had started making extra bowls of pasta by accident and leaving them on her desk. Noah shook his head and said, "You're running a secret kitchen." Emma shrugged. Maybe love doesn't need a permit. Daniel returned from a week on the road to find 2 coats of paint drying and a third simmering on the stove. He hugged them both and said the room felt bigger. Space grows when walls hold what matters. A week later, a packet arrived in the mail addressed to parent/guardian. Daniel opened it at the kitchen table and frowned in reflex before he recognized the contents. Emma's mid-year report, dean's list, a note about her hours at the resource center, an invitation for parents to write about the student in their life. He smiled and shook his head. The page remained blank for an hour, then filled itself without effort. He wrote about a girl who turned suspicion into stewardship and a son who turned force into craft, about a house that tried to be brave and learned how. He ended with a line that surprised him when he read it back. I thought I was the one raising them. I see now we raised each other. April brought rain that tried to apologize for winter. On a Tuesday morning, Emma's phone buzzed with a message from a name she had not seen in months. It was not Melissa. It was the man with the clean watch and the voice that sold opportunity for a living. The text was brief. We should talk. There's a way to make everyone whole. She stared at it until the edges blurred and then forwarded it to Daniel and the lawyer with 2 words. Not biting. Noah texted back a thumbs up and a photo of the porch rail shining in new varnish. Daniel replied with the sentence that had become his spine. We protect with math. The man never reached out again. Some shadows dissolve when nobody turns to look. Emma finished her first year without fanfare. No cap, no gown, just a girl in a cardboard box and a key turning in a lock. She hugged her roommate, took down the string lights carefully so they could survive another year, and sat on the dorm bed for a long minute with her hands on her knees. She whispered a thank you to a room that had held her learning and her loneliness without judgment. On the bus ride home, she wrote not in her diary, but in a letter to her mother she did not intend to mail. We are okay. Better than okay. I can see the place where fear used to sit at our table. There's a plant there now. Summer arrived like forgiveness you didn't beg for. The workshop door stayed open until late. Moths argued with the lamp. Daniel grilled on Sundays like it was a sport, burning one corner every time and calling it tradition. Emma stacked brochures for internships not because she wanted to go far but because she wanted to choose. Noah cut keys and sketched frames and once drove an hour to return a tool he'd borrowed even though the lender said, "Keep it, kid. Keeping is not always owning." On the last evening of June, they returned to the oak. The grass felt different under their shoes, the way familiar ground does after you've spent time walking elsewhere. Daniel brought the candle box even though the son wouldn't need the help. They did not make speeches. Emma set the box at the base of the tree and left it closed, a symbol no longer needed to stand on a table to be true. Noah leaned against the trunk and looked at the house through branches, as if measuring from a new sat and stretched his legs and felt a tension he had forgotten to release finally go. They spoke of next. Emma would take an internship at the resource center, paid in the currency of purpose. Noah would register the business name for real, pay the small fee, frame the receipt. Daniel would start leading the Tuesday group once a month, not because he wanted to be anyone's example, but because he owed the room a return on investment. Before they went in, Emma asked to stop by the fence. The far post had a scar where Noah once mismeasured by the width of a thumb, and then fixed it with patience and a new cut. She ran her fingers over the mark and smiled. "This is my favorite part," she said. "It's where we got it wrong and kept going." That night, Emma wrote a long entry and tucked it under her pillow the way she used to when she believed proximity made words warmer. "We did not win by force," she wrote. "We won by staying. We learned that turning the tables is not about flipping furniture. It's about reclaiming the meal, inviting only those who feed, and eating slowly enough to taste what was always ours." She blew out the lamp and listened to the house breathe. Somewhere in the dark, Daniel turned in his sleep and settled. In the garage, a tool clicked as it cooled. On the porch, the varnish cured another fraction of an inch, the way shame cures when you keep it in the sun and don't feed it excuses. The night held them. In the morning, Act 7 ended not with a flourish but with breakfast, coffee that did not require courage, eggs that shared a plate with fruit they hadn't had to count. Noah read the weather like a contractor and decided to work outside before the heat took the day. Daniel tied his laces with the satisfaction of a man who knows what his hands will build and what they won't. Emma opened her laptop to an email from the scholarship board. Subject line, opportunity. She smiled at the word. Opportunity used to sound like a trap. Now it sounded like a door she would open at her pace, with both hands, after checking the hinges herself. The table they had turned stood steady. Ahead were 2 acts and 55 pages of life to fill, not with spectacle, but with the kind of choices that make peace a habit. They had time. They had each other. They had a fund called Tomorrows and a practice called Ledger Night and a house that had learned, at last, how to keep its own promises. Act 8. My kids turned the tables on the woman who tried to destroy us. The year tilted toward summer again, that golden part of the calendar when even the light looks like forgiveness. The oak outside the house had widened its shade. The grass grew thick enough to remember rain. Inside, the rhythm of their rebuilt life hummed like an engine that finally knew what all its parts were for. Daniel's Tuesday group had doubled in size. He didn't lead it so much as host it. Chairs in a circle, coffee that tasted her because someone cared enough to bring cream, men learning the difficult grammar of accountability. He told them about math that protects love, and the room always went quiet. Most of them didn't know his whole story, only that the man with the gentle eyes had survived something they could name but not yet say aloud. Every now and then, after everyone left, he stayed behind to wipe the whiteboard clean. He liked the squeak the marker made as it disappeared. Erasing used to mean loss, now it meant readiness. Noah's workshop had outgrown the garage. He rented a narrow unit in the strip behind the grocery store, just wide enough for 2 sawhorses and a dream. He painted the door deep green and hung a sign with plain lettering, Willow Creek Repairs and Restorations. It wasn't a business plan yet, it was a declaration. The first day he opened the door, the air smelled of sawdust and courage. He took a picture, sent it to his sister and wrote, "Built without shortcuts." She replied with a heart emoji and a line from one of her favorite poems, "We mend the world by mending one hinge at a time." Emma was 2 years into college now, sharper and calmer at once. The girl who once studied people to find danger had begun studying them to find purpose. She majored in sociology and minored in finance because she believed empathy needed accounting. Her professors called her deliberate. Her friends called her old soul. She kept both names. On weekends, she interned at a nonprofit that taught families about financial recovery. Every time she helped a parent open their first savings account, She thought of the folder marked record at home and smiled. The Tomorrow's Fund had grown too. They deposited small amounts whenever they could, Noah from his repair work, Emma from tutoring, Daniel from overtime. Watching the numbers rise wasn't about wealth. It was about rhythm, the steady proof that their story no longer leaked. Then one June afternoon, a familiar name returned like thunder from a clear sky. Daniel was at the courthouse finalizing paperwork for a property case when a clerk said, "Sir, this notice came for you. Looks urgent." The envelope bore an unfamiliar law firm logo, but inside was a name he hadn't read in a long time. Melissa Carr. She was petitioning for bankruptcy, the document said, and required acknowledgement from any parties of record involved in prior financial disputes. It was a courtesy letter, not an obligation, but her signature at the bottom looked steadier than he remembered. There was a note clipped to the front, "I am trying to start again. If acknowledgement helps close your chapter, please sign and return. No contact necessary." Daniel stood in the courthouse lobby for a long minute. The tile under his feet gleamed like a mirror. His reflection looked older, yes, but anchored. He signed, not for her sake, but for his own, and walked out into air that smelled of rain. Closure, he realized, isn't delivered. It's chosen. When he told the kids that evening, they listened quietly. Noah shrugged. "Let her start over," he said. "We already did." Emma nodded, but later that night sat on the porch alone, thinking about forgiveness. How it isn't a door you open for someone else, it's a window you crack so the stale air can leave. Weeks passed. Life returned to its rhythm. Leisure nights, shared meals, laughter that belonged entirely to them. Then in late July, a letter arrived addressed to the Carter family in a handwriting Daniel didn't recognize but somehow knew. Inside was a single sheet. No apology this time, no plea, just a sentence. "Thank you for not letting my worst act define your story. I hope to learn from the way you endured." It wasn't signed, but they all knew. Daniel read it aloud, folded it, and placed it under the candle box on the mantel. "Let it live there," he said, "between what burned and what still gives light." Autumn found them busy again. Emma's internship turned into a fellowship. She traveled between campuses teaching budgeting workshops. She carried a small presentation titled "How to Protect Your Tomorrows." 3 slides of lessons disguised as advice. Number 1. Watch patterns, not promises. Number 2. Never trust numbers you can't trace. Number 3. Guard hope like a savings account. Deposit, don't withdraw. Every time she presented it, she saw her father's handwriting in her mind. The one sentence that had built their new foundation: "We protect with math." Noah, meanwhile, learned that success attracts shadows. A local investor approached him with a growth proposal, equipment. The man wore kindness like a uniform, too neat to be real. He promised quick revenue, national reach. Noah listened, the way his sister had once listened to bank statements. Then he asked for full cost sheets and legal oversight. The man smiled and said, "You're smart, maybe too smart." Noah smiled back, said exactly, and watched him leave. Later he called Emma and told her that saying no felt more powerful than any paycheck. She laughed. "You just turned another table," she said. Daniel watched all of it with the quiet pride of someone who finally saw the long arc of his choices. He still wore his wedding ring from his first marriage, not out of nostalgia, but as gratitude, a reminder that love, even when interrupted by loss, can still raise something lasting. He thought sometimes about dating again, but peace filled the space better than distraction ever could. His evenings were for walks, phone calls, and letters to the men in his group who needed encouragement more than advice. The second autumn after Emma left for college, she called one night with a tremor in her voice. "Dad," she said, "you might get a call from a journalist. They're doing a piece on financial recovery stories. Someone from my fellowship mentioned our case." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Do you want me to talk?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I want people to learn, but I don't want Melissa dragged through headlines. It's over." They talked for a long time about truth, privacy, ownership. In the end, they agreed to tell the story together but without names. The article appeared a month later under the title "Guardians of Tomorrow, A Family's Quiet Victory." It described betrayal without spectacle and healing without sentimentality. It quoted Daniel's line about math and love, Emma's advice on watching patterns, and Noah's phrase measured twice. Readers called it hopeful. The journalist called it rare. The week after it was published, Daniel received a postcard with no return address. It showed a coastline at dawn and a single line written across the back. I saw the article. You did right by the story. He recognized the handwriting but felt only stillness. He pinned the card above his desk and left it there, unframed, like a punctuation mark that didn't need pronouncing. Winter rolled in with clear skies. Emma came home early, her suitcase full of small gifts, a new screwdriver set for Noah, a handmade journal for Daniel. The three of them spent Christmas Eve around the same table where once they'd planned an investigation. Now it was just a table again, ordinary and beautiful. About Emma's plans for graduate school, Noah's steady stream of clients, Daniel's group expanding to include women who wanted a similar space. Outside, snow began to fall, soft as forgiveness. Daniel looked at his children and thought how far they'd come from the night of suspicion and fear. He raised his glass of cider and said, "To the work we didn't ask for but were lucky to do." Emma added, "To tables that stay turned." Noah grinned, "To every hinge that holds." They laughed, clinked glasses, and let silence finish the toast. January again. The air was sharp, the sky honest. Emma returned to campus for her final semester. Noah signed his first formal lease on the new workshop. Daniel began writing a book, not for fame, but for the men who might need a manual. Its title, Keeping What You Build. Each chapter ended with a line from their family's journey. The first chapter's epigraph was Emma's, "Wisdom doesn't shout. It waits for you to stop defending your mistakes." He mailed the manuscript to a small press that specialized in recovery stories. Months later they called to say they wanted to publish it. He said yes, not because of pride, but because he wanted his children to know that truth could earn its own living. When the proof copy arrived, he placed it on the mantel beside the candle box. The cover was plain, cream paper, black letters. No photos. The simplicity felt right. He turned to the dedication page and read what the editor had kept exactly as he'd written. "For Emma and Noah, who taught me that honesty is the only inheritance worth protecting." He left the book there. The house, it seemed, had learned to hold its own history without trembling. By spring, the first copies reached libraries and bookstores. One afternoon, Emma found a copy in her campus library, its spine slightly bent from use. Someone had underlined her favorite line, "Peace is what remains when explanation retires." She smiled and took a picture for her father. Noah texted back a photo of the workshop with a new sign above the door, "Measured Twice Holdings LLC." It wasn't irony. It was a quiet joke about how far they'd come from the days of missing funds. Daniel printed the text messages and pinned them beside the postcard from the coastline. Past and present shared the same corkboard now, balanced and still. In late May, they gathered again under the oak, as they always did when the weather turned forgiving. This time the branches hung heavy with new leaves. Daniel placed the candle box in the grass but didn't open it. He didn't need to. Emma handed him her graduation announcement. Noah handed him a small metal plaque for his desk that read Guardians of Tomorrow. He laughed and said, "You're turning me into a brand." "No," Emma said. "We're turning you into a lesson." The sky burned gold, the air smelled of cut grass and hope. Daniel looked at the horizon, at his children grown whole unafraid, and felt the world settle into balance. Betrayal had once been the loudest thing in their story, now it was just an early chapter. What came after was the real narrative, repair, endurance, and the quiet strength of people who refused to let damage define them. They stayed until the first stars appeared. The candle box caught the last light, glowing faintly as if the fire inside had learned to live without flame. Daniel closed his eyes and thought, "We've reached the calm that comes after justice, the silence that doesn't need to prove anything." The night held steady and the world for once did not turn against them. Time didn't heal their story, it finished it. Not with fanfare but with steadiness. The kind of ending that doesn't clap, it exhales. By the time Emma graduated, the world had turned 4 full seasons since Melissa's last letter. The oak outside their house was taller, its branches now touching the roof. Daniel liked to joke that the tree had grown with them, each new ring marking a chapter of forgiveness. He wasn't wrong. The morning of graduation, sunlight streamed through Emma's dorm window, landing on the folded gown at the foot of her bed. The air was heavy with lilacs from the quad below. She sat quietly watching dust dance in the light, thinking how strange it was that closure could look like such an ordinary day. When Daniel and Noah arrived, she met them halfway across the campus lawn. They didn't wave, they just walked into each other's arms. For a few seconds, all three held the silence like a photograph that would never fade. The ceremony was long, as ceremonies always are. But when her name was called, Emma Carter Daniels, something inside Daniel steadied. The crowd's applause sounded far away. He thought of that kitchen table years ago, papers scattered, tears quiet, a little girl whispering, "We'll fix it." Now here she was, fixed, whole, radiant. Afterward, they sat beneath a maple tree behind the auditorium, eating sandwiches they brought from home. Noah teased that her graduation robe looked like a magician's cape. It turned disaster into a degree. They laughed, the kind of laugh that tastes like victory disguised as relief. That summer became their quiet reward. Daniel took a month off for the first time in years. They drove to the lake where the family used to go before everything fell apart. The cabin still stood, leaning slightly, but the dock was gone. They rebuilt it together, 3 pairs of hands, 3 different tempos, one shared purpose. Every nail that sank into the wood sounded like punctuation. Every plank that fit snug was an answered prayer. At night they sat by the water, watching fireflies sketch small constellations above the reeds. Noah brought his guitar, Emma brought her diary. Daniel just listened. "Do you think she ever regrets it?" Emma asked softly. Daniel thought for a long time before answering. "Regret is a kind of tax," he said. "You pay it when you stop pretending you're rich in excuses." Emma nodded. "Then maybe she's finally paying." Noah added, "Maybe. But we already collected what mattered." The wind carried their words away, small boats on a forgiving tide. Autumn came again. Emma started her job at the financial literacy nonprofit, a position she'd helped design. Her first day, she stood before a group of young mothers learning to open their first accounts. She told them about trust, about patterns, about how numbers never lie but people sometimes do. She never mentioned names, but the room understood. Noah's repair business became a small company with a waiting list. He hired 2 friends, paid them fairly, and trained them with his quiet precision. The first paycheck he signed made him stare for a minute. Not because of the number, but because of the name beneath the signature, his own. Daniel's book, Keeping What You Build, found its readers slowly. He started receiving letters from strangers, widowers, single parents, even teenagers, thanking him for showing that kindness could survive betrayal. Some letters were messy, tear-stained, desperate. Others were calm, just a few lines. He answered every one. One morning a package arrived at his door. No sender listed. Inside was a copy of his book, dog-eared, underlined, and tucked between the page, written in handwriting he'd hoped never to see again. "I read your story. You told it better than I lived it. I'm in a small town now, teaching at a community center. I used your line, 'We protect with math,' in a class about rebuilding trust. If you'd rather forget me, I understand. Just know I didn't forget what you taught me by surviving me. M." Daniel read the letter 3 times. The first time his heart clenched. The second it softened. The third it let go. He folded the paper neatly and slid it into the back of his journal. That night, he sat outside under the oak tree and whispered into the dark, "Then maybe we both learned something after all." Winter returned with the kind of cold that tests the seams of a house. But their home held. Ledger nights continued, virtually when Emma traveled, in person when she visited. Noah added a whiteboard behind his desk labeled "Lessons from Leaks." Every time he almost made a mistake, he wrote it there. "So I never fixed the same pipe twice," he said. Daniel laughed at that, but secretly he did the same thing with people. In his group meetings, he wrote phrases on sticky notes. "Boundaries are kindness. Proof before trust. Silence is not peace." He'd look at them before bed like prayers for discipline. On Christmas Eve, Emma surprised them both with a framed photograph collage, 9 pictures, one from each year since the storm began. The first was grainy, tearful, dark. The last was bright, calm, balanced. 9 acts, she said. Our own. Daniel hung it in the hallway where the old portrait used to be. The one that once showed Melissa smiling, before they knew what that smile meant. The wall finally felt finished. The new year arrived with subtle grace. Emma spoke at a national conference about family resilience and financial literacy. Reporters called her the daughter who turned a lesson into a legacy. She smiled through the interviews but always redirected credit to her family. "It wasn't revenge that saved us," she said. "It was repair." Noah's company grew again. He renamed it Ledgerworks, saying the old name had done its job. The slogan he painted under the logo read, "Honest hands build lasting things." Daniel's book went into a second printing. The publisher asked for a sequel, but he declined. "The story's already complete," he said. Instead, he began mentoring other writers who wanted to tell their truth without bitterness. Their lives moved quietly toward stability. And then, one afternoon, almost like fate checking attendance, Emma received a message that made her pause. It was from a journalist researching a follow-up to Guardians of Tomorrow. They wanted to know if she'd be willing for a reconciliation feature. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she called her father. "Should I?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. "Only if you want to see how peace behaves when it meets the past," he said. After a week of thought, Emma agreed. The meeting took place in a small cafe 2 towns away. Rain tapped the windows like it had something gentle to say. When Melissa walked in, time itself seemed unsure whether to move forward or turn back. She looked older, her hair shorter, her expression stripped of vanity. Emma stood. "You look different," she said. Melissa nodded. "So do you. Stronger. Like your mother." They sat. No cameras, no recorders, just 2 women holding opposite ends of a once broken thread. "I'm not here for forgiveness," Melissa said quietly. "I just wanted you to see who I became after losing everything I stole." Emma sipped her coffee, watching the woman who had once been her villain. "I don't hate you," she said finally. "But I learned from you. That's enough." Melissa smiled faintly, tears waiting in the corners of her eyes. "Then I didn't fail completely." They spoke for an hour about life, about choices, about how people rebuild differently. When they stood to leave, Emma reached out first. Not reconciliation, just recognition. Outside, she called her father. "It's done," she said. Daniel didn't ask what was said. He only said, "I'm proud of how gently you end things." Years passed, but the story never truly left them. It just kept rewriting itself in quieter ink. Emma married a teacher she met at one of her seminars. They built a small house near the city but returned every other weekend to Willow Creek. The oak tree was still there, larger now, its branches tracing the sky like blessings. Noah expanded Ledgerworks into a regional network, employing people from difficult pasts, men and women trying to start over. "Everyone deserves a second draft," he'd say. Daniel retired early, splitting his time between mentoring and gardening. His tomatoes grew stubborn and sweet. Every summer they still gathered under the oak, the ritual unchanged. The candle box had long since lost its labels, but they kept it anyway. It no longer needed words. One evening, as dusk settled over the yard, Emma's little daughter, barefoot, curious, asked, "Grandpa, what's in that box?" Daniel smiled. "Light," he said. "We just don't need to open it anymore." The child grinned, satisfied with the mystery, and ran off chasing fireflies. Emma watched her go and whispered, "She'll never have to learn the hard way." Daniel nodded, his voice soft but sure. That's what turning the tables really meant. They sat in silence as the stars began to appear, slowly, tenderly, without spectacle. The house behind them glowed warm through its windows. The air smelled of rain and freshly cut grass. And for the first time in a very long time, every part of their story felt like it belonged exactly where it was. The tables had turned. The past had quieted. The light